Hello, I'm Gary Marchant from Arizona State University in Phoenix, Arizona, United States. I'm delighted to be part of this important conference. I'm going to talk today about soft law governance of AI and the right to know. So what is soft law? Soft law plays a very important role in the governance of AI. I define it as any substantive obligation and requirements created by instruments that are not directly legally enforceable. Now, a lot of different types of organizations can adopt soft law, including government, private companies or groups of private companies, non-governmental organizations, or any combination of the above. In fact, in our recent analysis of soft law governance in AI, we found that governments are the #1 participant in AI soft governance. These are sort of using non-regulatory tools to help govern AI over and beyond regulation. So these can be all kinds of things. They can be guidelines, ethical codes, principles, private standards, codes of conduct, and so on. So there's a lot of different options there. So AI soft law helps to fill many of the gaps and the problems and challenges of governing AI. We know that AI is moving very quickly, often too fast for traditional regulation to keep up. AI soft law tends to be more flexible and agile and more able to keep up with the technology. We have a very variety and heterogeneity of AI uses in industries. It's used in so many different contexts. It's hard to use regulation to cover all those different aspects, but soft law, you can let 1,000 flowers bloom. And as we'll see, there's almost literally 1,000 flowers blooming in the AI soft law field. Soft law is not limited by legal jurisdiction because it's not legally enforceable. It's not limited then to a particular country or jurisdiction. It is inherently international. And we know the technology is inherently international. So that's another advantage. And then it can really expand governance from not just governments and regulators to a lot of other expert groups that have interests and resources and expertise that they can apply to the governance context, including companies and industry, scientists and engineers and programmers, academics of all types, from the technical to the humanities, non-governmental organizations, and the different types of non-governmental organizations like think tanks to advocacy groups and all kinds of other entities can get involved in the governance process. It's not just limited to a few regulators. However, obviously, soft law has a lot of limitations as well. Who participates in the soft law mechanism? It's not guaranteed like a regulation who's involved. It's much more limited and maybe not known who participates. How is it enforced? Is it enforced at all? How is it accountable? How do we know companies are actually living up to these commitments? And then, combining all those is transparency. How do we know what's really going on with these programs? Because they don't have the built-in public, disclosure of government processes. So all these sort of combine in terms of creating a right to know challenge and limitation of soft law mechanisms that really do limit its effectiveness and credibility of these soft law programs. But regardless of the strengths and the weaknesses, it is a reality that soft law is playing a major role today in governance of AI, just because of the lack of regulation. And there's different views on this. Some people think this is the best approach, actually, that soft law could actually be the preferred approach, given how fast this technology is moving, how broad it is. Maybe traditional government regulation really isn't able to provide a primary oversight. Others think that, in fact, government regulation is the way to go. But given that we don't have that comprehensively yet, and probably won't for some time, second, soft law sort of fills in those gaps. Even, the recent European proposed regulation, which is the most leading regulation, I think, in AI in the world, it does involve and include soft law by asking companies to develop codes of conduct and so on that are built into the regulatory system. So soft law even plays a role there. And, a lot of times, government is limited by its resources, its jurisdiction, and so on, to comprehensively regulate right away. And so this allows us to fill those gaps, at least until the regulators are able to fill them. So whichever view you have of that, either way, the bottom line is soft law is here. It's playing a major role. And so we had a major project to sort of look at soft law governance of AI, both empirically and normatively, to think how what is happening now and in the past, and how can it be improved in the future. And my colleague, Carlos Ignacio Gutierrez, really led this empirical analysis, and he identified with his team over 630 AI soft law programs, and then analyzed them using 107 different fields of information. And the entire database is available at the link I showed you a couple of slides ago, and you can click on these and see them. And again, this goes on and on and on with 107 different columns here of what it's actually looking at. And so this gives us a really big body of evidence of what is actually out there now. What are companies actually and other entities actually applying in soft law of AI? And one of the things we found is that about 2/3 of the program do not publicly disclose any enforcement or implementation mechanisms. There are some that do, and these are the types of mechanisms we were able to detect in the programs that do communicate that. But for the vast majority of the programs, there is no disclosure of this publicly. They may not exist, or if they do exist, the companies or entities implementing the soft law are not making it public, and that's problematic. And so we think there's a need for an AI soft law 2.0, that we're developing best practices for soft law that include promoting the right to know, that there should be transparencies in all steps of the adoption and implementation of soft law programs. And again, this is in the interest of the entities who want to use soft law to make these programs both effective and credible and trustworthy. It's useful often to involve trusted intermediaries in the program, not just to do it within a specific company, but to bring in other entities who can help provide greater oversight and trust in the program's effectiveness. There should be regular public reports on what is happening with the program, what are the achievements, what are the limitations, and it should include, even though it's not directly enforceable, indirect enforcement mechanisms. We, in our research, have identified a number of different mechanisms that are out there to help enforce these soft law programs in indirect ways. For everything from, the supply chain of other companies requiring this, of auditing, of ethics committees and internal mechanisms. Insurers can play a big role, private standards, litigation, liability can play a big role. So we're looking at all these different tools that are available to try to put in place these indirect enforcement mechanisms for AI soft law. And we think with these, we can make soft law more credible and more effective for the critical role it's going to play in AI governance going forward. I'll close by just paraphrasing Winston Churchill. Soft law is the worst form of governance except for all the others. It has a lot of limitations, no question, but we really need to make it work better. It's in all of our interest to do that. And I think there's some really interesting and exciting ways we can move that forward. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some of that with you. And again, there's a ton of information at the website I showed of our project, of all the past history we've looked at, future ideas, existing programs, and so on. Thank you very much.